Okay. Well, one of the benefits of having a webinar is that we get to record, and we'll be able to share our conversation today in a replay for folks who are joining late or weren't able to attend for whatever reason. But we'll go ahead and get started. So allow me to stop sharing my screen for just a moment and say hi and thank you for tuning into the MetaRouter Deep Dive series, where we discuss real-world challenges in the web, technology, and digital space with real-world practitioners whose experience and perspectives we hope you'll find valuable. My name is Carlos Calderon. I'm today's host in this discussion titled Why Data is Now Everyone's Business, where we'll explore some practical and efficient ways for any team within an organization to better wrangle, integrate, and leverage data for making better decisions. Joining me today from clear across the pond, I'm happy to introduce Penelope Bellegarde, an expert digital consultant and founder of The Data Touch, a digital analytics consultancy operating in the UK and France. Penelope, welcome.
Hey,
I'm
Carlos.
so excited to have you.
Thank you so much. Me too. Thank you very much. Delighted to be here, and huge welcome to our audience as well.
Absolutely. Well, I know from having in our past conversations that you have a ton of experience in this being an advisor to companies on their digital analytics practices and data practices. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in this industry and how you made it your calling?
Sure, absolutely. I actually started in digital marketing about 15 years ago, which I was finding, really, really interesting. But I just knew that the numbers were missing, and that to get that credibility within organizations, I needed to add the numbers. And so that's why I went from digital marketing to digital analytics. And I've never looked back. It's been such a great opportunity to be able to help organizations really leverage their digital assets, whether it's about advising on how to make more money online or reduce costs, depending on which industries you're in, helping them really engage their customers, understand their customer needs better, and also manage competitive risks. It's great to understand an organization's performance, but we need to look at that in the wider context as well. And so I was hugely excited about that, and I worked across a number of industries. And then about 5 years ago or so, I decided that I really wanted to launch my own business. And so I launched The Data Touch. And for two main reasons, really. The first one was I really wanted to try and bridge the gap between data and business, and really make data as relevant as possible to senior leadership teams and business teams in general, which is what I call, bringing data into the boardroom, targeted insights that people understand and want to act on. And the second piece is around empowering everyone with data, because I really believe, and this is what we'll talk about in a minute, that data is for everyone. And so that was also something that was really dear to me. And a little bit more recently, I got involved in machine learning. So it's making that transition from descriptive analysis and making it a little bit more interesting, but actually trying to predict what it is that a customer might or might not do. So it's been a fun journey. It's a really exciting world, and I'm delighted to be able to share some of that with you today.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad to have you, and it does sound like you've had quite a journey in progressing through these various topics. And it keeps getting more and more diverse and more complex. And I think that you're absolutely right. So, and for today's conversation, I think it's important to reiterate what you just said about the business, right? So businesses have data, but by and large, it's managed by a group of engineers and IT professionals and data scientists and analytic folks. But then the business owners the business stakeholders who drive the strategy need to have some data fluency and being able to understand what that data means to their business. So in driving their strategies, that's so well put. So, right. For folks who work in the business context and probably a few layers removed from the data world of systems and tables and data analytics and all of the work there, where should people start? You have a pretty well established method for just getting going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited about it because this is something that anyone can implement right away. After this webinar, any team can use that because it's simple and it works. And so there's three basically main parts of that equation. The first one is to take a step back and really try and understand what it is that we need to answer. What's the key business question here? And the reason why we start here is because spending that quality time at the beginning to define the problem will get us to the solution quicker. But also it will ensure that there is no confusion at the end and that we know that we've answered the right problem, as opposed to dive into data first, which I see that happening far too much. And then if you do that, you end up with a lot of noise and complexity. And if we listen to what Einstein would say, if he says that if he had an hour to solve a problem, he'd spend 55 minutes working out the exact question and 5 minutes to get to that solution. So it's really worth starting there. And of course, there are a few criteria that a good business question should meet. So for example, it needs to be specific and actionable. So what do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. A question like, how can we increase sales, which is front of mind, isn't a great question because it is just too vague. And also, because it's too vague, it doesn't allow us to start thinking about KPIs, which is number 2 in that 3-step method. So, a better way of framing that question might be something like, okay, how can we increase sales by 10% year on year for Christmas? And that way it gives the business a lot more focus. And also it means that, okay, we're thinking Christmas, we're thinking 10%, we can start thinking about some more precise metrics. And so that's really the first where you start, investing that time, identifying what the problem is. Data doesn't come first, as I always tend to say. The business does, the organization does. And then once we've got that question, okay, what are the metrics that are going to help us understand how to get there? And this is the topic of KPIs, which is fascinating. The problem with that is a lot of organizations will label a metric a KPI when actually what they have is a KRI, so a key result indicator. So for example, something like sales or profits, which are very useful metrics, obviously, they're not very good KPIs. They are key result indicators. They're telling us whether we're traveling in the right direction, which of course we need to be aware of. But they're not KPIs because they're not telling us what we need to do next. If we know that we are up or down 10% on sales, what do we do next? Is it a marketing problem? Is it a product problem? Is it a market problem? It could be so many factors. So a KPI is, like the business question, a lot more specific. And to give an example to our audience, a KPI example that I love giving is one of the KPIs that Amazon use. One of the KPIs they use is percentage of negative reviews per product. It doesn't get more actionable than this, because if that KPI reaches a certain threshold, they just get rid of the product. And that's a great KPI because when you see that number, you know what to do. So KPI is very much future oriented as opposed to a passive metric that tells you what happened.
Yeah. Well, do you mind if I ask? Sure. I want to make a comment about that what you just said, because it's so interesting. I think often when you're talking about sales, you look at units sold and you say, well, that's high or that's low, and that's good or that's bad. But there are other lurking variables and factors that go into that. I would imagine Amazon looks at returns and complaints and potentially other factors like you just mentioned that ultimately tell the business, this is not, it's not delighting our customers. It's costing us money in terms of like processing and returns and having to deal with the vendor or the supplier. I would imagine there are a variety of other indicators that, other than units sold, that really do factor into the logic that Amazon's considering. And I love that example. I use one that's even sillier. It's, you look at the speedometer on a car and you can tell that you're going really, really fast, but if the car is sitting on blocks, then you're not really actually moving. So you've got to also look at distance traveled, right? So there's other factors to really understanding what a KPI actually means to your business. I thought that was really fascinating observation. I love that one. Do you have any others?
This one is, so, you know, what's interesting is I get that question a lot. So for example, let's say we are media clients, you know, what's a good KPI for a media client? And my challenge is always, if you haven't defined your business question, then let's not go into KPI just now. And for me, there isn't a, I really refrain from giving clients, you know, oh, these are typical KPIs for your industry.
Yeah.
Because I think that, you know, an organization is so specific and unique in what they want to achieve, in their strategy, that, and I really want them to actually identify the questions first, and then we'll talk about KPIs.
Yeah.
But let's not get into data first.
Yes.
That's, you know, let's get into the question and then the KPIs. But I love sharing the Amazon one because it just shows how because it's the actionable factor, if you like, of the metric that's important. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so we have asking the right question. You know what I forgot to do, and I hope that everybody will, forgive me for missing this important slide where we will talk about basically how efficient, where you start with data. So we've covered of the 3 steps that Penelope shared with us, it's asking the right questions, which I love. I'm going to use that story about Einstein. Defining KPIs first, asking the questions, defining the KPIs, because I think too often people use data to rationalize the past instead of really understanding what decisions to make about the future. And you have a third one. And so tell us about the third one.
That's right, exactly. And so once we've done that, it's about we know what we're trying to answer, and we know the metrics that are going to help us there. The final piece is, how do we make data operational day to day within the business? And again, you know, it's something that any team can start thinking about. And we've got that measurement framework at the end, which is a recap of what we discussed. You know, it's a recap of, you know, here are the things I want to find out about my marketing, my customers, whatever it might be. Here are the metrics that are going to help me get there. Here are the people accountable for these metrics. And another key criteria behind a KPI is accountability. So who's responsible for the KPI? Because if everyone is, no one is, right? So there needs to be that accountability, which is a whole exercise in itself. And also it's about what are the actions that team or that individual can take to start influencing the KPI. And, you know, that having that framework makes data operational. It is not something that is meant to be set in stone. Because a KPI valid in January this year may not be valid next year. So it's very much something that shifts with the context of the organization, but at least having that framework in place with key stakeholders, we know exactly who's responsible for what. And we review this on a weekly, monthly basis, makes it operational, and it really helps embed data within business processes day to day.
I think that what you just said resonates really strongly with folks who I tend to interact with a lot, which are in the marketing space. There is no shortage of examples of how data is deprecating in certain areas, and what the KPIs that people used to hang all their hopes and dreams on are starting to take a dip, and they're trying to rationalize not only what should they measure, but why they should no longer value or start to deprioritize the value and importance placed on metrics that maybe aren't as accurate as they once were. This is, I love the idea of it being not a memorialized, static, etched in stone program, because what you're describing here is an engine of self-correction.
Yes, absolutely. Data needs to be movable, it needs to be shiftable, because it needs to stay relevant with the business.
Right. Very true. Okay. Well, I promise I'm going to get the hang of this screen sharing thing. It's so I skipped over sharing the first bullet, which is how and where to start with your data. The 3 steps that you shared with us, I think, are fantastic. A fantastic place to start in auditing how you view your data practice or your business, the business outcomes that you hope to achieve. Yes. Let's also move on down to why data is now everyone's business within an organization. I know that probably sounds a little silly, but what we talked about earlier in your introduction was how business owners or business stakeholders were several layers removed from the data itself, and there's a language gap and a knowledge gap between what the data folks understand about the business and what the business folks understand about the data. But I would imagine there are other examples that we're going to talk about how it's not just those two sides of the organization. There are others involved in this shifting paradigm as well.
Absolutely.
Right? Talk to us about what you're seeing out in the marketplace with regard to that.
Yeah, sure. And I think, first of all, if an organization is to become data-driven, like so many of them aspire to be, then they don't really have a choice. And it's not just about data and analytics team feeding in insights to marketers or sales. It is about everyone leveling up and adopting certain data mechanisms. It's not about making everyone a data scientist, overnight, but it is about, for example, that method that I shared earlier, that can be done by any team. And sure, you may need a little bit of a data team helping, guiding around the metrics. But these teams will know the business better than any data and analytics team. So there are things that, we heavily rely on them for. And that's why they absolutely need to be involved, Everyone in the business needs to be empowered to be able to act on data day to day. And by the way, that means potentially failing as well and making mistakes, which I know is hard to hear sometimes, but that's because data is not an exact science. Data quality sometimes isn't just there. People will have the wrong KPIs, and so the wrong decisions will be made. But at least there was an effort from the organization that said, okay, we gave you data, we gave you a dashboard, you made a decision that was data-based. It was the wrong one, but that's okay. It is a transition, making everyone data savvy is a journey. Sending people in a data training course for half a day or a day is great, but it doesn't stop there. that's where it starts, you know. Just like you wouldn't send a data analyst to a marketing course and expect them to become a fine marketeer at the end of it. There needs to be repetition, and we need to be patient as well with as analysts, I guess, with the business. You know, this is a transition, this is a journey, it takes time. But as long as there's the cultural shift that says, okay, everyone is empowered now with data, and it's not an overnight thing, it shouldn't be an overnight thing, then that would be a huge, huge step, I would say. Yeah. And coming, yeah, go on, sorry.
Well, no, I think what is resonating with me, everybody takes from their life experiences when interacting with other smart folks who are experienced as well, and kind of immediately stories come to mind. And what I think I'm taking away from what you just said is that there's tribal knowledge inside of certain teams about their data, and explaining what column A and column B are very important in helping other teams be able to say data column A that in your data set is valuable for my work, column B isn't, but they have to understand what it means. So there really is a library and cataloging and describing of not only schemas, but context of what this data, what value a data set has for one team and how it might be related to another. And I think there's some obstacles and some learning challenges to that, right? So just one small example that I can say has helped me when hiring incredible analysts. I had to have them go through marketing courses to understand what a cost per milli was, to understand what an engagement click was and how that was different from an actual web visit. So those kinds of metrics that appear in reports that they could understand and help bring that knowledge to the business owners and the business stakeholders who were trying to get better insights and better reporting from that data. So it really was a bidirectional knowledge transfer of, this is what I need from the data, help me understand what's available, and I've got this data, help me understand what it means, right? So I love what you're describing here. And for me, that's I think one of the largest challenges when trying to share with other groups, is that it's a whole learning agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, these conversations you've just described are where the magic happens. That's how data meets business and business meets data, and they learn from each other and they become relevant. And that's how you increase performance at the end of the day. And you can do that. It doesn't have to be as formal as a training session. It could be a workshop. I've seen wonderful things happen over a KPI workshop, because that's where the thinking goes, and people start thinking about, wow, I actually didn't know that this data existed, but that's exactly what I need. And yeah, so absolutely.
So when you say not having a fear of failure, it's also not having a fear of transparency and sharing.
Yes.
Right? You don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know it, how can you ever know if it's valuable for your work? And if I may offer one other example, oftentimes what MetaRouter helps businesses enable is sending the behind the scenes metadata about a page, about a visitor, about a product, about an action or an event that's happening through to various systems. But if the business owner, the marketer, doesn't also understand that metadata and what it's for and how it can be leveraged to their, to augment or improve their programs, then there's a missed opportunity there. And I think there's some hesitation in not just wanting to learn more stuff, because I think everybody's busy enough these days managing with the world within their own purview. But I think it's also, there's some hesitation about having to explain to a group that is different from yours what something is, because you have to embark on this whole journey of really explaining something very foundational that they just don't have the knowledge on. So there's a cooperativeness and a collaboration that also has to be a part of this, this idea of failure, and that there is also learning and slowness and getting a culture to really embrace every aspect of the data that's coming into the business, right?
Yes, that's right. That's right. And I think that point about learning is really important, because sometimes a key data myth as well is that, data is just about financial stuff. It's about making more money or reducing costs. And it absolutely is about that, but not only. It is also about gaining insights on your customers. And arguably, that might be more significant, certainly in the long run. So it's not just about the money. It is also about the learning, learning about your market, your customers, because again, that will make you more relevant, and that will make you last in the long run. So, but I appreciate it's a hard message sometimes to have, especially in large corporations where, it's all about the bottom line. And I guess, one way to polish that message is, yes, it is about the bottom line, but actually, if you get to know your customers better, then your bottom line will be a lot better in the long run. So,
Yeah. I was gonna wait till the end to ask this question, because it's thought provoking to think that we're now leaning on computers to help discover insights and maybe reveal questions, but those computers need to be fed well-defined, well-instructed data sets, and the data scientists need to understand that this column really doesn't matter, because it can't be influenced, or it's not something that really should be weighted to do it to any degree in their modeling. So I think that even if we are progressing toward a world where computers are doing more and more of the quote unquote thinking for us, it still requires programmers to understand the instructions and the data that they're providing it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So speaking of, I'm sorry, go ahead. No, please. I love this conversation.
I was going to say, and again, starting with, what are we trying to predict here? And in many cases, data scientists won't be the best person to identify that. It will be the business. Hence why these conversations need to happen ASAP, so that the data that comes out at the end is relevant and is solving the right problem.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm sure we can spend a lot more time on just this topic, but I want to make sure that we get through the other components of today's presentation, the other bullets that we wanted to address, which are, technical tasks. When the tasks are no longer technical, data collection may stretch the boundaries of your role on the team. Are we talking about Excel Plus? What are we talking about?
It's a very interesting one, and it's going back to, we said that data is now for everyone, but even the technical tasks are also for everyone. So let me explain here. When I used to be putting tracking plans together, for example, what's the data that we need to start collecting? It used to be a dialogue between the analyst, the developer, and maybe a few business stakeholders, typically a marketer. And there's a few things that have happened recently, which mean that conversation needs to be opened up to the wider business. First of all, by law, so GDPR in Europe and the CCPA in California, there's a we are facing, well, organizations are facing a lot more restrictions in terms of data collection. And so legal teams, for example, are suddenly involved into that data collection conversation. But also more practically, you know, there are, what's really important to remember is that if you take the case of a usability team, for example, or content team, yes, they're not data experts, but they are experts in their own areas. And so they know better than anyone else what it is that they need to understand to continue to perform better. And so they need to be included in the data collection table, because their views on what their data needs are is really, really important. So I think it's, I think it's a great promotion exercise for data as well, because it allows everyone to restart from scratch and say, well, actually, as a UX person, I need to understand this, this, and that. And the data analyst can start and say, oh yeah, okay, so I can give you, we can start collecting A, B, and C. These are easily collectible. But you see what I mean, as opposed to the data analyst making the decisions on behalf of, you know, a few stakeholders. You know, everyone needs to be involved, because otherwise they will end up with irrelevant reports that don't make sense to them, that they don't want to use. And that's how we don't get to a data-driven organization. You know, it is for everyone. It's not just for certain teams that have always been involved in data. It is for absolutely everyone, if the organization is to succeed. And so let's start involving these guys right at the start, at the data collection stage. Yeah.
That, you know, again, everything that you say resonates so strongly within me. I even get sometimes goosebumps when I'm talking about this, because I have a feeling that a lot of people who are tuning in to our conversation today have been invited against their will to participate in conversations around the data lineage of customer data. How did we get it? Where did it come through the plumbing? What systems did it go into? Where does it go out to? How are we using it? When do we use it? Which teams are using it? And it brings in every aspect of the business. I mean, a simple example from the two that you gave us about GDPR and CCPA, that those have to do with customer right to be forgotten or in privacy. So if someone opts out of a company having their data, what responsibilities does the business have to also retain the purchase receipt that they made 6 months ago, to make sure that they have a record for that individual's purchase and potentially warranty claim? You know, there are aspects of a business that are operationally non-negotiable for making sure that the service that's supposed to be rendered to the customer is maintained. But in other aspects of the business, it's eliminated from marketing, and it's eliminated from from other areas where the customer or the consumer might not want their data being used, right? So it brings in everything from supply chain to finance to marketing to customer service to sales to literally every aspect of the business. And I know that there are a lot of data mapping exercises going on, and there's a burgeoning industry around managing the ownership and lineage of data throughout an entire organization. The bigger you are, the more complicated it is, right?
Yeah, exactly. And one interesting thing about this is, even though a lot of this was driven by new legislation, and it is, you know, in some cases it has caused chaos across organizations. But I try and look at it in a positive way, in the sense that this is the opportunity to do a massive data audit, looking at the data that we've got, why we're collecting it, and who is it serving. And again, it's an opportunity to bring everyone around the table. Did you know we had this data? Did you know we had that data?
Right.
Wow, no, I didn't know that. And actually that could be so relevant to me. So again, it's about that promoting data in a way that is nearly natural, if you like. And also, how many times have you heard people say, oh, the problem in our organization is we have too much data. We have 35 systems that collect sales data and none of them are telling us the same number. And that gives data a bad rep because people start mistrusting the data, they get confused, which system shall we use? Whereas if you do that audit, at least again, it's giving the organization the opportunity to say, oh, hang on a minute, we've got 35 different systems here. Let's either communicate on the caveats extremely clearly every time a report goes out, let's communicate on all these caveats, or let's remove half of these systems because they're probably not relevant anymore and we will go with this, and that will bring trust and transparency, which is another problem that I think a lot of organizations face, is that mistrust in data because, oh, I've seen this number in one report, this other number in this other report, which one should I trust?
What is the source of truth? No, that's so nice of you to, such a nice perspective, and one that I think everyone would be wise to remember, and myself included, is that there is a way to view this because, from a legal perspective, mitigating the risk and potential threat that not complying with the lineage of data, your customer data, might mean to your business. But on the flip side of this exercise, which really, I don't know about you, but when IT and legal are involved in organizing a company to act, it tends to happen, right? So now that we're working through it, I think you're right. We're going to, on the other side of this, several years from now, when we're all a little grayer, we will look back and say, what an amazing opportunity that was to have more transparency of the data across an organization, better mapping, better coordination, and ideally in service of a customer, which ultimately is probably going to yield a better experience for them. Everything from consent frameworks to how their data is collected, why it's being used, and where it's being acted on. Like those conversations prior to the year 2020 really weren't part of the larger conversation, at least in the space of the marketing and advertising world, which my experience tends to lie. Is that what you're seeing in other industries as well? Is this kind of silver lining to the cloud?
I think so. Yes, I think so. I think it's definitely becoming a trend, and I think that's a good thing, And
yeah,
I one of the things I keep saying is there's a wonderful thing about the digital world, which is the fact that there is so much data available. Well, there used to, before the soon death of cookies. And in a way, it was doing us a disservice because everything was available, we weren't too picky about it. And it was all about, quantity over quality. Whereas now that we have to restrict ourselves and think twice about, oh, should we capture this? Should we not? Then, because we are having to make that extra effort at the beginning, is this going to be useful or not? I think that's actually a good thing. And we will probably end up with more quality data in the end. We'll end up with less, which is great because it will stop confusing stakeholders anyway, but we'll probably end up with better quality data. And yes, data is not an exact science. There will always be data that's missing, but there will always be a way of measuring it in an ethical way and in an accurate way. So, yeah.
You kind of teed up an opportunity to say one more thing about what you just said just now about cookies, and how in the previous paradigm, it was, cookies exist, they're out there, Sometimes we have them, sometimes we don't. But by and large, that data space lived outside of an organization, right? So with cookies being defined as included in what companies must govern and manage, companies like MetaRouter help organizations control what data is being set in the cookie space and where and why it's actioned by working with either a consent provider or working within the governance of either a customer data governance or a compliance group in an organization. So basically, I think there's a lot of technologies out there that are coming out to solve some of the gaps that have been identified in this network of data that has not necessarily been in the, shrouded by the fog of war, but literally not well understood by the folks who manage the data inside of organizations. So I find oftentimes we're talking about the control of data with security and compliance folks and business stakeholders who need to understand why and when and how and where to use that data for their programs. I think this is a lovely segue, I think, into our last bullet point.
Yeah.
All right. So I've got to do my screen share again. I'm getting the hang of it now. All right. So bullet number 4. Okay. What areas within an organization are having the most significant renaissance and understanding and acceleration of learning about the data that they have either available to them or new data that helps them make better decisions?
Yes, and I think this is interesting because one of the things that I've been observing over the past couple of years or so, which has been a radical change from when I started. When I started, my main internal customers would be marketers and sales and people, and with content becoming more and more strategic now, and with so many organizations investing a lot more in content because they are seeing it as strategic, I'm finding a lot of content people starting to sit at the data table, and rightly so, and really keen on understanding, what are the data points that we can capture to really understand the effectiveness of our content. And it's really interesting to see large organizations who traditionally are all about selling products and services, and that now invest substantial sums of money in content because they understand that actually we want to be known for a lot more than just our key services and products. We want to help customers in a different way as well by providing relevant content, help them make better decisions. And I've seen this in the financial world, which I think is a great news for customers, education around financial decisions, for example. And so it's been such an interesting shift to see content people and content decisions really becoming core to these very large organizations, which wasn't the case before.
If I can probe for a little bit more understanding, are you saying that content is experiencing a greater surge in being able to curate for individualized experiences and customer interactions, or is it really more the larger theme of content? Because I think what you're talking about is consumer behavior and the expectations that we all have, myself included, that the companies that I interact with know a little bit more about me than my account number.
Yes. I think that's both. And, having been involved in content analysis, recently, for large organizations, one of the things that was really interesting was to see how one piece of content, how some content could be completely used by very different countries and they were relevant. But for some countries, content had to be completely localized to be personalized and be relevant. And so I think there's content can be made so relevant in different ways. And so, I think it's absolutely both. It can really help the personalization agenda and becoming relevant. But also, it can be used by an organization as a strategic route as well, on top of just selling services and products. We'll keep doing that, but we are also now a content producer, and we provide valuable content to our customers at a global level. And you happen to be part of this market, then we'll serve you even more personalized content, because it's a way of engaging customers and making them stay, in the longer run, as well. So I think that's
I think that's spot on. As a matter of fact, I would say, in addition to the impact that can be had on the messaging itself, where the messaging happens is also becoming, it's always been important, but knowing where and who and why you're talking to your customer is incredibly valuable, so that you can make sure that the message is appropriate for that context and that action or step that they're either stuck on or you want them to take. So I feel that the messaging, the complexity of messaging, and the diversity of channels in which messaging or content can be delivered is exploding. With customer data platforms and with experience platforms, dynamic creative optimization providers, as well as a variety of other technologies in the text and email space that are really trying to help make sure that you've got enough awareness about the situation that your customer is in to craft a message inside of the content in the channel that's where you can meet them best. Right? Not necessarily on Facebook if they're not on Facebook, not necessarily on email if they never read their email, right? So I think what you're talking about there is the diversity of content and the diversity of places where that messaging can be delivered is really big. I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other way is actually, so it's great to understand our content performance and how that can vary from one customer segment to another. Yeah. But also, you can analyze content outside of your organization. What are the things that customers are talking about in relation to our organization? Because that can give ideas in terms of, we should design a product like this, a new service like this. So there's so many strategic things that can be done through content analysis within, but also outside organizations. So it's a huge area, I think.
Well, I think I 100% agree. And I can't believe I've lost track of time. And I want to make sure that we get to distilling all of what we've talked about, at least the salient takeaways, because even if you're not in the content generation space or the marketing space, or, the compliance and GDPR space, and you want to take something away from our conversation today that's meaningful to your group or business, I want to run through a couple of key questions that you can ask yourself or your organization in auditing where you stand in your data journey. Penelope, help us understand why these questions are important and how companies should approach these if they want to get started.
Yes, I think they're very important. And I think we have a question from Nigel as well about data collection that we can answer in a minute.
Wonderful. Yeah, we'll definitely get through these questions and leave time for questions in about hopefully 5 minutes. How's that sound?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I think these questions are very important because I tend to describe data as this huge ocean. Where do you start? It's huge. It's absolutely huge. Where is the gold? Where is the value? And so sometimes it can be very scary to start, and you're not sure where to start. And that's why I really think that the method that we talked at the very beginning is where you should start. You should start with, what do you need to find out? What would add value to your business? If you knew the answer to that question, what would you be able to do as an organization? Is that centered on value? In which case, let's do that. And then we look at the metrics and we worry about how to capture that data.
The 3 steps that we talked about earlier, we will make sure that are presented front and center when in the replay. And we will also put links to the material that we've covered today. But those 3 questions, I think, are a great place to start. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah.
So what's the single most important thing that you should look at? Because you can start with those 3 questions, but if you start in the wrong, you might start in a part of the business that may not matter that much. Is that what you're talking about when we say, what's the most important thing you can do now?
I think that can be done at a team level as well. A marketing team can ask that question. A customer service team can ask that question, and that will guide them towards what KPIs they should start looking at. So I think it's really something that any team can start doing right now. And in terms of, so what's the single most important thing we can do right now? Well, ask yourselves better questions. Are they specific enough? Are they actionable enough? And I would also say, empower, as if we have leaders in that audience, people managing teams, I would encourage them to empower their own teams to really start acting on data. And like I also said, sometimes potentially failing and not getting it right straight away. Data is not an exact science. So yeah, empower as many people as possible, whether it's through training, whether it's through practical workshops, but everyone has the right to get into that journey. And because at the end of the day, they will become more efficient, more productive. And data can be very fun as well, as you know.
I think that's right. Just only thing that I would say is that if you don't know what the data is or don't know that it exists, you can never really ask good questions. So taking inventory and being clear about what you have available is a great place to start. Yeah. What about, we've got another question from Nigel. We will get to you right now. What barriers to progress or blockers do people need to be aware of? What's the single biggest challenge to getting going?
I think it's important to have the humility to start small and not trying to tackle too many things, because it will feel like a mountain. So start really, really small. And again, I will go back to what questions do you need to answer, because that will allow you to, it will force you to remain practical and relevant to your teams or your department. And so do not let yourselves be scared by data, by the complexity of it. Let that to the data scientist. You don't have to worry about that. Just do not let yourself being overwhelmed by it, because if you start step by step, then that's the best way to start. Absolutely. That's
wonderful. I want to make sure that we give time to answer Nigel's question that he's asked.
Yes.
He says, is data collection a constant activity? If so, it can act as a validation of the smooth running or otherwise of systems and processes that drive, say, growth and innovation.
Yeah. So
the question is data collection a constant activity?
I'd say yes, it is. There are data outages and problems happen. But, for the majority of cases, yes, it is a constant activity. It should be a constant activity, purely because it is completely shifting. Customer behaviors are, changing all the time, and we need to make sure that we're on top of that. Same for the competition. So it should be a constant exercise, absolutely. And yeah, one of the main purpose of data is to drive growth and innovation as well. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think what I'm not trying to read between the lines of what Nigel's asking, but it could be that sometimes if the data is not being collected, or let's say the data is not being collected, and collecting it might actually be used as a validation, some sort of validation point. But I think there's a component to what he's describing here, which is if you don't have the data that you need, what are the challenges in getting it, whether it's behind some database that you're unaware of or not being collected by the organization at all? How do you broach finding the data that you need?
Ask yourself what's going to give you the biggest amount of value, and then there's always a way, I would say. There's always new technologies that are capturing different types of data. When I started, web analytics was just about website data, and now it's digital analytics, and yes, it's social media. There's tons of data available out there. Competitive intelligence data that's also within reach, and that's great insights. And also, if you don't have the data, why don't you ask your customers? There's so many easy ways to survey your customers these days, and yes, not everyone will answer, but you would be surprised, some of the insights that you can get sometimes. And so yeah, absolutely. And it may not be the data people asking that, it could be customer service or, other teams that are better placed and closer to customers.
That's exactly right. And I know we're at time, but I wanted to offer my final thought, and then I would ask you to offer yours. I think the spirit of this conversation is really about sharing knowledge about something that you might not know enough about, from a different team, from a different company, from a different perspective. So for those that know me, my motto is sharing is caring. And I hope that you were able to learn something from our sharing today and Penelope's experiences. But raise your hand and make a friend somewhere in the organization and ask good questions of them. And you'll begin to start asking better questions of the business. Penelope, thank you so much for for joining us today. Would you like to close us out with any final thoughts?
Thanks, Carlos. It was great. I really enjoyed it. I really hope that the audience found it practical and that there are things that they can start implementing right away. I really believe they can, regardless of their background. And so I really hope that we've started to demystify data as well for a few people out there. And for me, that would be a great achievement.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to all of you and questions. I hope all of you have a wonderful day. Thank you and take care.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.